Well, if you've never seen clicker training before, hopefully you found that interesting. They actually sell little clickers at Petco and PetSmart and things like that, and they're like $1, and you can actually keep them on your keychain. And I have found them to be very effective for training my dogs to sit, stay, come, these kinds of things, as well as to ring a bell to get out of the back door if they want to go out. A whole bunch of different things that are really easy to train them when they get that really specific feedback that the clicker provides. All right, so I gave you a bunch of different videos to illustrate what I'm talking about here, but the basic idea is that you've got what started off as just basic research, testing out a theory, testing out hypotheses, trying to figure out, like how these different things work. And then they have transitioned from basic into applied research, as now they're trying to figure out, okay, how does clicker training work for an animal, right? How can we eliminate learned helplessness in a person who has started to develop anxiety? Things like that, right? We have like very specific applied uses for what had started off as basic research. So it's really super important for you guys to remember that basic research and applied research are not separate entities that don't interact with each other. They both use the scientific method. They are very similar in nature. They just have different intentions with their results. Applied research has a specific use right now. Basic research is testing hypotheses and theories. Ultimately, basic research tends to become the fodder for applied research. Okay, so now that we understand that this is how people remember things, how can we use that to improve student learning in classes, right? So we start to say, let's take these basic theories that have been tested and have become pretty solid and see how they might actually work in the real world. All right. So homogeneity of samples refers to one of the biggest complaints about how artificial research is, especially in psychology. They say, well, our most common research participants are college students. College students don't represent average people, and so our samples are faulty from the very beginning, and so it's a problem. It's true. We do a lot of research on college students, and just, to feel defensive about it, because I do a lot of research on college students, is that, we typically don't have, research grants for our research. And so we need people who will work for extra credit or to fulfill a requirement of their course, right? So yeah, we do a lot of research on college students. Less defensively, I would like to point out that this is a really good starting point. If we have an idea, for a method or a study that we want to do, we might as well start off testing it and its effectiveness on an easy to access sample of people. College students make a lot of sense for that. They're a really good starting point. They are diverse. They can range in age. There are a lot of factors that are a really good starting point about college students. They're willing to do it. Depending on what you're studying, some characteristics are universal, and so it doesn't matter how old or young you are, or what ethnicity you are, or any of those factors. What sex you are, those things are just, it doesn't matter for certain things. They're just universal. I'm thinking of things like sleep and certain biological things are going to be, oftentimes it doesn't matter who you study. Things that are really robust, like memory tests. It really doesn't matter who you study. Now, I say it doesn't really matter. You get to a certain age above which memory might start to change. You have, kids are not super good at using their memories until they're about 12. So they're a little hit or miss for using techniques. But for the vast majority of, from 12 to 70, you're talking about a lot of consistency between people. And so it kind of doesn't really matter if you start off with college students or if you're using college students, because they're representing a lot of people. And then, maybe I'm doing research on college students because that's who I have access to, but maybe another researcher who has access to older adults who they could test, and that would extend the sample beyond the college student sample. Or maybe somebody who wants to study children younger than 12 could replicate it into that sample. And so we can get more diversity of samples by other researchers extending it out to the people that they have access to. different types of people are going to be recruited whenever it's appropriate for the hypothesis. So, if you think that ethnicity is going to matter, then you absolutely recruit people of different ethnicities. If you think age is going to matter, you do that, right? I've got age twice because I've got, maybe we think older people will respond differently, or that we think children will respond differently. Neurotypicality is another issue that we might want to test different kinds of people, or based on sex, or there are lots of different factors that we might think might matter on different hypotheses. So of course we're gonna recruit different kinds of samples. When I was in grad school, I did some of my research on children. I studied third graders and sixth graders for some of my research. And then when I was working with my mentor, he was really interested in aging. And so I was the designated driver to go pick up our elderly participants from wherever they lived in Albuquerque, and brought them to the lab to participate in our reaction time study. You have to, and it was really interesting. We were like, where are we going to recruit older people from? And we were really struggling for where to put up our flyers and things like that. But we discovered, if we posted in the local bingo halls and at churches and at community groups and all sorts, that we were plastering that town with, recruitment flyers for people who were over the age of 70 to participate in our study. Because we needed older people. You can't just do college students and say, I'm sure that this would pan out for people over 70. You can't do that. So if it's appropriate, then you go to the trouble of recruiting people of the proper type. So the conclusions I'd like to leave you with in this subject, first off, I just really want to underscore that all those things that I talked about that were problems with polls are things that we take into consideration when we're developing our studies, so that we avoid those problems on purpose. Like, part of the reason why you're hearing about them right now in this class, and you'll hear about them again when you take research methods, and then if you go into graduate school, you'll get trained further in how to avoid these errors and how to design good scales and stuff, is that we are trying to make sure that we correct those errors. And we don't want our students to think that polls are anything like the kinds of materials that we use in studies. So when we talk about basic research, they're always going to be testing theories. Applied research is going to be the type of research where we have a specific use for our findings. Basic research oftentimes becomes applied research. Quite frequently, we're going to have a basic research that transitions into, okay, now how can we actually use this in the classroom, or we can really use this in the clinical setting or whatever. Now with sampling, we oftentimes begin with college students as a baseline, and then we expand our sample to other people as needed to test the hypotheses, or through replications as other researchers just naturally start to expand the sample. So these are the really big takeaways that I'd like you to focus on from this chapter. Hopefully the videos I had you watch and the other things that, some examples we talked about really help to illustrate, the idea that studies aren't as artificial as a lot of the complaints imply that they are, and that there are a lot of fixes that we can implement in our studies to make sure that they're as realistic and applicable as they can be. All right. That should do us for this chapter. I will see you in the next chapter.